Good morning and welcome to the 2021 Grantmaking Intelligence Conference. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging that I'm currently standing on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. This conference is, we think, the only cross-sector grant-making conference in Australia and maybe actually the world. Cross-sector as in we have people from local, state and federal government here, also philanthropic and corporate grant makers. Basically anyone who gives a bunch of money for a cause is a grant maker and is joining us today. And we think that's really unique and really exciting because we have so much to learn from each other. So to kick us off today, it's my pleasure to welcome Dennis Moriarty to the stage. Dennis is our community's founder and Group Managing Director, and he knows more about grants than any other human on the planet.
I've seen many changes. The most obvious one is the explosive growth of the sector. For various reasons, governments have decided that commissioning other people to spend money is more effective than spending the money itself. Where we used to be talking about $30 million grant rounds, we're now talking about $300 million grant rounds. The sector used to be small and weak. It's now hulking and powerful. Well, semi-powerful. There's more to maturity than size though. You're supposed to be better at using your strength too. Looking at the grant-making industry over that time, it's been a matter of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 1 step sideways, stumble, drop an armful of papers into a puddle, try to pick them up, break your glasses in the process, and then have a long pause while you try to remember where you were going in the first place. There are 6 areas where I believe I can prove my point, where we've fallen short and not gained maturity. 1, we haven't built a profession. 2, we haven't enforced a code of ethics. 3, we haven't found a way to use our data. 4, we haven't found a way to measure our outcomes. 5, we haven't come to terms with diversity. 6, we're not ready for the emerging technological changes. And 7, as a solution to some of the above, for which I may sound up myself, but it's something I'm passionate about and have spent the last 21 years working towards, Smarty Grants is going to solve some of these in a big way.
Thanks to Dennis about where we've come from, it's time to take a look at the current landscape. And to do that, we have Nathan Mifsud from our community's Innovation Lab team.
By identifying where grant money flows, my hope is that you'll get a broad idea about how the social sector in Australia is operating, with a focus on those changes that coincided with the spread of the pandemic over the past year. This could give us an understanding of the needs and patterns of support that we see and prompt some reflection about your own grant-making behaviours.
So it's now my pleasure to introduce you to Nathan's colleague and my colleague at the Innovation Lab, Sarah Barker. Sarah is our community's Innovation Director, heading up a team of data scientists, including Nathan and Paola, who are working to help grant makers and not-for-profit organisations make the most of the data that you're all collecting.
So at the end of the day, the idea of grants AI is a buzzword, but we're really more interested in grants intelligence. We could even have a whole conference about it. And it will take a lot of hard work to build this data-driven grants ecosystem. Some of it will be on a project basis that you drive forward as a grant maker, or your grantees do more with their data. Some of it will be enabled through data sharing, and some of it will be enabled through systems and infrastructure that help support the grants ecosystem. And you might have already identified some ideas. Without this ongoing effort to learn, improve and optimise, there's a chance that money's being spent on things that just aren't that important. If we can make grants more intelligent, this is a great result for you as the grant maker, the not-for-profits you're funding, and any data practitioners that have gotten involved and the communities that you're serving.
Grant makers here who've had a particularly difficult 12 months shoveling money out the door. So I'm just wondering if you could reflect for us on how you balance risk with speed when things like bushfires and pandemics and things strike.
Yeah, and It's a really good question, because if government's going to circle around after it's given you money, this is not a good thing. So if you get your grant and then it turns out you've spent your grant to stay afloat, and then government comes in and says, well, you were never qualified for it, that's a problem. So what government needs to do, and we've got to do more thinking in this space too about exactly how it does it, it needs to say it's important to get money out quickly, and if it's 90% right, whatever it is, whatever percentage you say, then that's a good result, right? And you set up the system to be very clear around qualification, and if there's fraud that goes on, you go fraud, but for mistake, you say we're going to take that on the chin.
If we take a flexible approach to that, certainly, final reporting is really important to us, and it's a really important part of closing that loop so we can then understand the impacts that we're making. But one of the things that I'm interested in looking at, particularly with our drought impacted communities, is placing less onus on our grant recipients in terms of final reporting, and looking at alternative ways in which we can capture that real gold that people, talk to you about on the phone, and when you talk to them in the community, capturing that in a multimedia, potentially video-based format, so that forms part of their outcome reporting. But we take some of that load, far less load on the grant recipient themselves, because, really we want them just to get on with the good stuff, which is doing their stuff in the community.
I have to confess a deep ambivalence about these trends. And the drive, it's both an internal drive and an external drive on charities to be more efficient, more outcomes focused, more innovative. It has lots of really good aspects to it. And I have an abiding concern that we're losing something very fundamental along the way.
We found that many first-time applicants, the people who have found out about the program and think they've got an idea that will work and really want to have a go, they seem to focus on one or two key areas about what they wanted to do, but they overlook other really important aspects of the grant application itself, which are things like risks, risk management, even identifying what potential risk might be, how they're going to disseminate their outcomes and their successes. And I say successes in a way that even if something doesn't quite work out the way you think, it can still be a successful outcome, and you can still learn a lot from that. And even going back down, I know it's a state government thing, but looking at procurement and how that's going to happen. And sometimes that can be the difference between whether an application is successful or not and gets funding or not, is some of those little minutiae.
One of the key things that come out of our framework is the need to be looking much more broadly than the climate and environment movement, because that's just a tiny part of the key to changing in terms of climate change.
I guess in an Aboriginal perspective, it's almost like a square peg in a round hole. There is no one answer, and I say that because over here on the West Coast, we generally don't use the word Indigenous. It's a government-imposed term. We seem to use Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. Where on the East Coast, I've noticed it seems more acceptable to use the term Indigenous. And there's other areas that don't refer to Indigenous or Aboriginal in particular, but by their actual First Nation language group or traditional owner group. So for me, I'd be saying I am a Nyerbali woman rather than I'm an Aboriginal woman. I think the best thing to do is actually don't fear offending somebody, because generally it's an opportunity to educate yourself and just ask somebody the question of what they prefer.
I have the great privilege of being part of the Victorian African Communities Action Plan Task Force. And one of the things that very much frustrates me is that they tend to be a group that is approached about a particular program that a part of government might be interested in doing. But what they aren't approached to do is to go into government departments and particular systems and redesign them in a way that would make them far more inclusive.
It's a pretty important job, giving people money and selecting which people will get your money. And so it happens at all levels of government and then in the philanthropic sector as well. So the commonality is the role and the responsibility. The ways they do it and what they're doing it for all differ. But fundamentally there's some basics that apply, and everybody's doing it and they just get to learn from all the different sectors. What all of us want at different times is to know that they're not alone, that there are other people who face the same dilemmas they do. It's apparent at the local government level that you will oftentimes go through a cycle where different people will say we all want discretionary grants or we don't want discretionary grants, and we're seeing it more and more in the state and federal government where the ministerial discretion takes on a greater role. I think people are looking for the confidence that the processes that they're undertaking, the steps they're making are defensible and reasonable, and they're doing the best they can as professional grant makers.